are hosted by the South Carolina Energy Office, part of the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff. We are delighted that you could join us to learn more about the U.S. Department of Energy's, or DOE, formula funding opportunity. Please be aware that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared later. If you would please take a moment, if you haven't already, to update your name and organization in your box. If you're new to WebEx, just it's in the upper right-hand corner, and there you can click under More Options, Edit Display Name, to add your name and the organization that you're representing. We'd really like to know who's here today, so thank you so much. I am Rochelle Tolton. I am an energy specialist with the Energy Office and will serve as your host today. Also from the Energy Office, we have Stacy Washington, our Deputy Director, and we'll hear more from her in a little bit. In a few moments, we will have a presentation on the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant, or EECBG, program by the Department of Energy Project Officer Kate Donatelli. Following her presentation, we will open the session up for a discussion, including potential project ideas and time for discussion, as well as questions and answers. We will conclude the webinar with a resource for technical assistance related to this funding opportunity and follow-up contacts. Before we go any further, I'd like to get some feedback from you, our participants, with a one-question poll. So I'm going to share this poll, and I'm not sure everyone will be able to see it, but before learning of today's webinar, how familiar were you with DOE's Energy Efficiency Community Block Grant funding opportunity? So if you would go ahead and so not familiar, maybe the announcement was the first thing you learned about it. Slightly familiar, you've heard some of the potential funding. Moderately familiar, maybe you've watched some of the DOE's webinars. We're very familiar. We have been, we've already applied to start the process for the funding. All right, I'm going to go ahead and we have about 8 participants that have. I'm going to go ahead and I think I'm going to share it, but it seems like, here we go. So of those that responded, it was sort of split. Some people had no familiarity, and then some were moderately familiar, with a few that slightly or very familiar. All right, so it seems like this is a great opportunity for our speaker to share a little bit more about it. So if you have questions during the primary presentation, we ask that you put them in the chat, and we'll get to those after the presentation. Or just hold on to them and ask them afterwards. And I realize the poll may have been a little quick, so, but I think it still gave us an idea of who was here. So I'd like to go ahead and take a moment to introduce our speaker. Kate Donatelli is Project Officer with the Department of Energy's Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant program, working primarily with formula grantees. She has a background in energy efficiency and demand management programs. Prior to joining DOE, she worked at the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. We welcome you, Kate. And we'll see about sharing your presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm just going to pull up some slides, and hopefully you all can see those.
Yes.
Excellent. Great. Well, good morning, everyone. It's so great to be here with you. Thanks so much to the South Carolina Energy Office, to Rochelle, Stacy, and their colleagues for giving us the opportunity to talk with you all today about the EECBG program. Our goal for today's webinar is to basically just run through some of the basics of the program. Based on that polling, it seems like we have varying levels of familiarity. Second, we'd like to get you all the information that you need in order to actually apply for a formula grant. And finally, we're going to talk about some of the ways that you can make the most of your award. And most importantly, we also want to hear from you about how you're planning to use your awards and answer any questions you may have. So I'm going to start off by just running us through a brief presentation, and I will try to keep it brief so that we can have as much time as possible at the end for discussion. So to quickly run us through an agenda for today, we're going to start with a brief overview of the EECBG program. Then we'll review everything you need to know in order to submit your application for formula funding. After that, we'll talk about a few of the ways that you can use your formula allocation to its maximum potential, and we'll end with some Q&A. So starting with that brief overview, first, I'm just going to provide a little bit of context about how this program fits into the overall DOE structure. So the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program, which you'll hear us refer to as EECBG, lives in the Office of State and Community Energy Programs, also called SCEP, within the Department of Energy. SCEP is a fairly new office. It was established last year, and our goal is basically to be like your front door to DOE. So we're an access point that states and communities can use to find assistance opportunities and programs that support your needs and goals. SCEP manages a fairly large portfolio of programs, about $16 billion in funding, including funding from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which supports the EECBG program. You may have heard of some of the other programs within SCEP, such as the Weatherization Assistance Program or the State Energy Program. And as an office, we have several strategic priorities listed on this slide, including deploying clean energy technologies, catalyzing local economic development, creating jobs, avoiding pollution through place-based strategies, reducing energy costs, and we want those efforts to be centered on equity and further our goal of having at least 40% of our investments benefit disadvantaged communities, which takes me to my next slide. So that 40% goal I just referenced comes from the Justice 40 initiative, which is perhaps something that you may have heard of. This comes from an executive order signed by President Biden in January 2021 that provides guidance on how certain federal investments might be made toward the goal that 40% of overall benefits flow to disadvantaged communities. This was a pretty monumental and first of its kind directive for the federal government. It caused a lot of excitement and a lot of anticipation, and it really has a massively wide reach. So there are 140 DOE programs that fall under its purview, including, of course, the EECBG program. So as you're thinking about how you want to use your formula allocation, we just wanted to flag this important initiative up front to get you thinking about how you might advance the goals of Justice 40 in your own jurisdiction. So now I'll get into the EECBG program itself. The EECBG program supports state, local, and tribal governments in activities that reduce fossil fuel emissions in a manner that's environmentally sustainable and maximizes benefits to communities, reduce total energy use, and improve efficiency in the transportation, buildings, and other sectors. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is also known as IIJA or EJA, and sometimes referred to as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, made significant investments in the EECBG program by appropriating $550 million to states, local governments, and tribes. So that $550 million appropriation is divided between formula and competitive grants, and it's distributed to states, local governments, and tribes, as you can see illustrated here. In the interest of time, I won't go through all of the various allocations, but I will flag that 68% of the grant funding, or approximately $300 million, is going to eligible local governments, such as yourselves. And this funding is allocated to eligible local governments using a formula that's established by DOE. At this point, I imagine that you're probably all familiar with your specific allocations, but if you want some more clarity on that, you can find those on our website. And after I'm done presenting, I'll share a link to that in the chat so you can look that up. I'll also flag that 2% of the IIJA appropriation is set aside for competitive grants, which are available to local governments, tribes, and consortia that are not eligible to receive a formula grant. So today we're primarily talking about the formula side of things, but I did just want to make sure that you were aware of this other opportunity, especially if there are folks on the line that maybe were not eligible for that formula grant. So while the EECBG program certainly injects a lot of much needed funding into state, local, and tribal governments, the program's appropriation under the bipartisan infrastructure law is about 1/6 of what it was in 2009, which was the last time this program was funded. So I think what that essentially amounts to for this group, we're seeing local and tribal governments in South Carolina have allocations ranging from about $11,000 to about $390,000. And while there's certainly a lot you can do with those funds, we're encouraging recipients to think about this really critically, how they can best use them to see, as something more like seed funding. So this seed funding can be used to develop strategies, capacity, and experience that might help you to leverage other sources of funding and support that can catalyze impactful and self-sustaining clean energy work in your communities. And we want to provide you with as much support as possible in this. So later on in the presentation, I'll get into some of the resources that we're providing that will really allow you to make the most of this funding. So one of the best things about the EECBG program is its flexibility. There are a really wide range of eligible activities and uses for EECBG program funding. So this slide shows that there are 15 eligible activity areas that are outlined in law, and they cover a really broad range of projects and programs. There are 14 on this slide, and then there's a 15th that's a little bit more of a catch-all, and you can read more about that in our application instructions. But eligible activities can range from developing energy efficiency and conservation strategies to deploying technologies that reduce emissions or generate renewable electricity. The bipartisan infrastructure law also added a new activity area, which is noted on this slide, that opens the door for grantees to pursue more renewable energy and sustainable transportation activities. So just for instance, funds could be used under this eligible activity for building out electric vehicle infrastructure or developing community solar programs that benefit disadvantaged communities. And when you're thinking about how to use your EECBG funds, we also encourage you to consider a few critical questions. So first of all, how can we use our funds to their maximum benefit? Are there opportunities for us to leverage additional sources of funding? And how can we use our funds in ways that lead to equitable and just outcomes? And overall, we really just encourage you to take a place-based approach that responds to the local needs in your community and propels you forward on your clean energy transition. So section 2.2 of the application instructions includes a lot more detail on allowable activities. And in the coming weeks, we'll also be releasing additional guidance to get you thinking about the activities that you might pursue. And I will, again, share a link to those application instructions at the end. It's a very important resource. And then just lastly on this slide, if you're looking for additional support or inspiration on where to focus your funding, we are also developing a set of project and program blueprints to help guide you in that decision making. And I'll speak to those a little bit more at the end of the presentation. So next up, one thing that we heard really loud and clear from stakeholders is that managing a federal grant can be a lot of work, especially for those of you that have maybe less experience with federal grants or have limited staffing capacity or resources. And I'm sure that that's something that you are all experiencing in some form. So one of the ways that we're trying to address this is by providing two options for accessing your formula funds. So the first is that traditional direct formula grant with all of the application and administrative requirements that go along with it. And the second is a more streamlined voucher option. So the voucher option essentially allows you to exchange your formula award for a set of predefined activities or services. Vouchers can be used for two main purposes: technical assistance and equipment rebates. For the technical assistance option, you can use your voucher to access support from experts across a pretty wide array of high value opportunities and energy efficiency, renewable energy, transportation, and other related areas. And you can engage in activities such as policy planning and program design, building retrofit planning and design, community and stakeholder engagement, there really are a lot of possibilities. On the equipment rebate side, there will be vouchers available for the purchase and installation of eligible pieces of equipment. And this is essentially available so that we can reimburse entities for the purchase of energy-related equipment that they need to meet their goals. Equipment that are eligible for rebates span a wide range of technologies that are deployed to reduce fossil fuel use or increase energy efficiency. And this could include things like efficient materials and technologies used to retrofit buildings, things like HVAC equipment, air source heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, windows, doors, insulation, other weatherization materials. It could include electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging infrastructure. It could include equipment for renewable energy installations, including wind, solar, and storage, metering equipment, and any other ancillary measures like electric system upgrades that you'd need to accommodate these installations. So now that we've covered all the different ways that you can use your funding, the next very important step will, of course, be to apply. And as you can see on this slide, there are a few application deadlines that you should be familiar with. So first and foremost is the pre-award information sheet. And this is something that all applicants need to complete by April 28th. That's very soon, but the good news is the pre-award information sheet is relatively straightforward, and you don't need to have a fully developed program or project idea to complete it. But it does contain a few key pieces of information that will need to process your application once you submit it. I'll note that we recently had to update our pre-award information sheet due to some technical issues that people were having. So if you've tried to complete this form before in the past and you weren't able to do so, or you encountered any issues, I encourage you to check back to the version that's currently on our website. So that's the pre-award information sheet. And even though that's due in just a few weeks, you still have a lot of time to complete the actual application. So local and tribal governments have until January 31st, 2024 to complete their applications. You can, of course, do this earlier. And the sooner you apply, the sooner you'll be able to access your funds. And we'll be using quarterly application review periods ending in April, July, October, and January, as indicated on this slide. It's also important to note that we will be prioritizing certain applications for review. So eligible entities that are pursuing vouchers or using a blueprint can expect that their applications will be reviewed within 60 days. And additionally, some topical areas can also expect expedited reviews. So these would be applications that include like some teaming element, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. Applications that focus on investing in disadvantaged communities, those that focus on strategy development or technical consulting, and those that focus on stakeholder engagement. All right, so now that we've talked about some of the program basics, let's get into the application process. So essentially what this slide has is like a 10,000-foot view of everything you need to do in order to apply. So first and foremost, you can apply for formula grants right now. Application information, including instructions and some sample forms, are up on our website. So, if you feel ready to pursue this, the opportunity is open to you. But before you can actually apply, there are a couple of things that you need to do first. So if you are applying for a direct grant, so that's as opposed to a voucher, you need to register in a few federal systems, including the System for Award Management, or SAM, and FedConnect. And there are links to those on our slides and up on our website. And also, as we discussed, all applicants, whether you're applying for a direct grant or a voucher, must complete that pre-award information sheet by April 28th. So after you complete all of these pre-application steps, you'll need to submit your application by the deadline, which again is January 31st, 2024 for local and tribal governments. All right, so now let's talk about the application itself. So as you can see on this slide, there are a pretty wide range of materials that you'll be required to submit with your application for, in this case, what this slide is showing you is the requirements for a direct grant. I won't spend too much time on this slide, but I would encourage you to check out a recording of a recent webinar that we held on the application process. During that webinar, we walked through each one of these components sort of step by step. And we also have a detailed set of application instructions up on our website. And again, I'll make sure you all get links to all those resources. But just in general, here are the sort of things that you'll need to include with your application. So first off, we have standard application and budget files that are going to be available through Page, which is our grants management platform. You may also include an energy efficiency and conservation strategy, which we also refer to as an EECS, which is a document that essentially describes how you're going to use your EECBG program funds to further energy efficiency and conservation goals in your community. So you can either submit the EECS with your application at the time you submit it, or local governments also have the option to submit their EECS no more than 1 year after the effective date of your award. So we have templates available on our website for local governments to assist you in putting this strategy together. We're also providing some additional technical assistance specifically for these strategies for those of you that may need some additional support, and I'll speak to that a little bit at the end of the presentation. So after the EECS, your application will also include an activity file where you outline your proposed activities, funding, and major milestones. And then finally, you'll also need to demonstrate compliance with a number of policies such as the Davis-Bacon Act, National Environmental Policy Act, and others. So just again, there's a lot here, and I strongly encourage you to check out the application instructions and our webinar on the application process for like a much more detailed rundown of these requirements. But I think the main takeaway here is that there's a pretty wide range of materials that you'll need to submit your application. So even though that deadline is not until January 31st, we definitely recommend starting this process as soon as you can. So if that last slide left you feeling a little overwhelmed about all of the application requirements, you might consider applying for a voucher. So as you can see, compared to the traditional grant requirements on the last slide, there's significantly less paperwork involved in the voucher application process. The trade-off to this more streamlined approach is that there's a little bit less flexibility in the types of projects you can pursue with a voucher. Just as a reminder, you can use those for technical assistance or equipment rebates. However, we strongly encourage you to consider this option, especially if you're receiving less than $250,000. So Appendix 1 of the application instructions contains a much more detailed comparison of the grant and voucher options. We'll also be releasing some additional guidance on this in the near future, including an upcoming webinar, which I'll talk about later. And just as a reminder, all eligible entities have to submit that pre-award information sheet due on April 28th, even if you plan to apply for a voucher. All right, so to close out the presentation, I just wanted to review some of the ways that you can maximize your funding allocations and the resources that DOE is providing to help you along in this process. So first of all, at the top of the presentation, I mentioned that the EECBG program is included in President Biden's Justice 40 initiative. So to that end, there are several ways that we suggest promoting energy justice using your formula award. So first, I would encourage you to check out the White House Council on Environmental Quality's Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. This is a tool that allows you to identify overburdened and underserved census tracts in your community so that you can incorporate them into your planning. For instance, you might start by identifying what those communities are in your jurisdiction and designing your EECBG funds to be most effective for the needs of those communities. So this definition of disadvantaged community is built right into the tool, which allows you to enter like an address or a zip code to determine where disadvantaged communities might be within your jurisdiction. I actually just yesterday was taking a look at the tool and looking at South Carolina specifically, and I think there were several of these disadvantaged census tracts identified, and so I think there's probably a pretty good chance that some of you in your jurisdiction are grappling with these issues. So this is a really powerful tool, for those of you that want to use it for planning. And so second, I'll note that DOE established 8 policy priorities, which are listed on this slide, that relate to specific outcomes or benefits for disadvantaged communities. So again, this is something that you may consider when you're designing programs or projects. You may structure them specifically around one of these outcomes. Okay, so vouchers are another way that you can maximize your program funds while, again, lessening some of those administrative burdens that typically go along with direct grants. And I've kind of already spoken at length about vouchers, so I won't belabor the point, but these may be a good option for entities that know they want to pursue technical assistance or a specific equipment installation. So definitely stay tuned for more information on vouchers, including a webinar that we have coming up. So we also strongly encourage eligible entities in the same regional area to consider teaming up to help make their EECBG funds go further. Teams essentially require a minimum of 2 eligible entities to pair up, but you can certainly expand beyond that. You can opt to go in together for a voucher or a grant, and you would only need to submit 1 application, although each entity is still going to be responsible for managing their own grant. So this might be a great option if you aim to pursue a regional approach that could benefit multiple communities. This could be things like regional planning design, workforce development programs, things that might cross your particular jurisdictional boundaries. And another resource that we have are blueprints. So towards the beginning of this presentation and sort of throughout, I was referring to these, but blueprints are something that DOE is developing to provide step-by-step evidence-based processes that eligible entities can follow to streamline their implementation of a project. So we're hoping that these blueprints will not only spark inspiration for what you can do with your funds, but also give you a clear outline for how you can actually do it. So blueprints are designed to guide grantees towards high impact and effective activities that are predetermined as eligible uses for EECBG funds. They focus DOE's technical assistance into a few key areas. So you can see a list of blueprint topics on the right-hand side of the screen here. Blueprints will also provide you support in potentially leveraging other sources of federal funding. And blueprints have the added advantage of a streamlined application review process. So grant applications that follow a blueprint will have an expected 60-day average processing time. So be on the lookout for more information on blueprints in the very near future. The topics marked in the list on the right with an asterisk, those blueprints will be available up on our website very soon. Actually, I don't have an exact date, but those should be available too all very soon. And the rest will be available by April 30th. So lastly, we've got some webinars, to help you out through the design and application process. You've heard me reference past webinars a couple of times during this presentation. I hope that some of you at least were able to attend those, and if not, we have recordings up on our website. So our past webinars have included introductory presentations, which were very similar to this one. We also did that in-depth review of the application process, which I strongly recommend you check out if you want to know more about applying. And we're going to continue to hold webinars throughout the application process on topics such as vouchers. So that one is scheduled for April 13th. We also have a technical assistance webinar scheduled for May 4th and a webinar on Justice 40 scheduled for May 11th. And we have a couple of other topics in the works, as you can see listed here. During the actual implementation period, we will continue to support you by assisting with the development of a comprehensive energy strategy through blueprints and technical assistance, with tools and online resources, and by giving you access to experts that can help you build capacity and knowledge. We'll also continue to hold webinars and workshops. And as I mentioned before, we have specific technical assistance available for the development of energy efficiency and conservation strategies. So you'll remember that's going to be a component of your application, either submitted at the time you apply or within a year. And that technical assistance in the development of those strategies is provided by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And finally, please just know that we always aim to be responsive to your questions and to your needs. Meetings like this one that we're having today are just one of the ways that you can engage with us. We're also available via email at EECBG at hq.doe.gov. And there is a specific inbox on the slide for questions about the competitive grant. We are also going to be piloting bi-weekly office hours to answer your questions directly and in person. The first of these sessions is actually taking place this afternoon, and unfortunately, registration for that one is closed, but we'll be holding these every other week, and we encourage you to bring your questions to future sessions. So thank you all so much for listening to my spiel, and thanks again to the South Carolina Energy Office. I hope you found this helpful. I'm also sure it sparked some questions, which I'm happy to take now. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thanks, Kate, for doing this great presentation. And so what I wanted to do is introduce Stacy Washington, our Deputy Director, and she's going to help moderate any questions. And I invite all the participants to, if you'd like to go ahead and join us on screen for this conversation, but it is being recorded. So if you prefer, feel free to put questions in the chat and we'll get to those. And one last piece, I know Kate said she's going to share some of those links she talked about in our chat, as well as we'll have a follow-up email after the webinar, and we'll provide some of that information at that time as well. So Stacy, if you want to go ahead and share, appreciate it.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Stacy Washington here, and I'll be moderating the Q&A today. We do have one question that has come in during the presentation from Catherine. She said, would LED lighting for a building be eligible for an equipment rebate for the voucher?
Thanks. Yeah, great question. I'll say just sort of at the top in general, when it comes to specific questions about the use of funds, it's difficult for us to say without seeing a full application whether or not something is or is not eligible. But I would just encourage you again to take a look at the list of eligible activities will align with the sorts of things that are going to be allowable for vouchers. And with something like lighting, I think a lot of it too will depend on the context of that. So you'll see that there's an eligible activity specifically for street lighting. So for something like that. And then if they're, depending on how you're going to use those measures in another context, that I think that would have a bearing. But again, it sounds like that's something that aligns with one of our eligible uses, and the exact application, we would have to see exactly how you plan to apply it. But yeah.
Great. And I do know that some people have thought about what they would like to do with the funds. If anybody would like to chime in with what they plan to do with that, that might give some people some ideas if they don't know what they want to do yet. Oh, Mary Pat, you're on mute.
I think people look so stupid when they do that, and then I just did. We are going to, City of Columbia is working with Dominion, and they are switching over all the utility-owned streetlights to LED. And so we want to use our formula funding to switch over the ones that are city-owned, starting with the disadvantaged communities.
That sounds great. Yeah, and I would just refer you to, I had to look up the number, but it's number 12 of the eligible uses in our application instructions refers to the replacement of traffic signals and street lighting with energy efficient lighting technologies. So it sounds like that's the path you're going on.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Mary Pat, did you say that would be a voucher, or you were doing the?
It will be a voucher, and that makes me very happy. Yeah.
And we do have another question in the chat. Is the EECS required for the voucher grant?
Yes, the EECS will be required whether you pursue a direct grant or a voucher. So that again for local governments can be submitted at the time of your application or within 1 year of the award date. And if you go to the first link that I shared, which is the program formula grant application hub website, I believe there's a section called like key documents. That's where you'll find a template that you can choose to use to develop your your EECS. You know, if you're starting from scratch or if you need, you know, some additional support in putting that document together.
Great. And one of the things that was also raised is teaming. Is anyone looking at teaming or working with like a county and a city, like Horry County and Myrtle Beach could do something, or the city of Columbia, Lexington County, Richland County, Berkeley County, Hilton Head, just throwing out some places that may have some synergies to teams. Anyone looking at that option? While you're thinking, there is a question that came in the chat. May these funds be used to supplement another grant related to energy?
Yeah, so that's one of the things, you know, we as I said before, you know, we're thinking of the EECBG funds really as seed funding, and encouraging people to look for opportunities to leverage other sources. There are some restrictions on that. So for instance, the funding cannot be used as a cost match for other state and federal funds, and EECBG funding must be used for a distinct activity separate for, you know, the activities paid for by other funds. So you should also just make sure that, you know, the activities, if you're using more than one federal grant, that there's no sort of duplication between the activities there.
And we have another question from Raquel. What can we expect to see more on the different blueprints? When can we expect to see more on the different blueprints?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, there are a couple of blueprints that were listed on one of my slides, that those ones have been finalized, and I expect that they will be published very soon on our website if they haven't been already. And then the second half of the blueprints will be available by April 30th. So I understand that that is after the pre-award information sheet deadline. But like I said before, you know, the pre-award information sheet doesn't require you to have this fully baked program or project idea yet. It's just for us to collect some essential information about your entity and your office that will need to process your award. So definitely be on the lookout for those. And I believe that our webinar on technical assistance coming up in May also touch on the available blueprints.
And we did have another municipality that was not able to attend today that offered up what they plan to do with the funding, in case that's helpful to someone as well. This municipality said that they were going to do 2 vouchers. The first one for a fleet transition plan, and the second one, that she said that was 9-2A technical assistance vouchers, policy planning and program design. And then the second would be to purchase electric vehicles and or charging stations. And that is 9-2B vouchers for equipment rebates, electric vehicles. So that is another way to look at it as well. And I see Amy Haas has her hand up.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I had trouble getting, so I couldn't get the audio through my computer. So I'm talking to you through my cell phone. So I came a little late, so I apologize if my questions have already been addressed or answered. But so we have, or I have, and I just started with the City of Myrtle Beach last week as the new grants coordinator. So I have an allocation letter in front of me so the city has been allocated 76.5. So when you say, you know, are we thinking about teaming with Horry County, it's my understanding that that's not even an option. So like we've already got our award, and you know, if we could get more than that, I'd be all in, but it's my understanding that 76.5 is all we're going to get. So, you know, that's what we're planning on. Is that correct?
So actually, multiple entities that are eligible to receive their own funds can team up together. So just because you have a formula allocation does not mean that you can't team up with somebody else that also has a formula allocation. So there's a little bit more about this in our application instructions, but essentially, at a minimum, a team consists of 2 eligible entities. It can have more, and you would work together to submit a joint application for a project that you'd be working on together. The one thing is that, there will be certain grants management and reporting requirements that each entity will be responsible for. But you will be able to make your dollars go further by teaming with another eligible entity. That is possible.
Gotcha. Okay. That's it.
And I'll say
Thank
Horry
you.
County, if you're able to connect with them, it might be helpful because they're receiving over 300,000, I believe. So that might help.
That's not, so according to my list, I don't see Horry County on here. The list I have does not have Horry County as a recipient. Oh, South Carolina, according to my list, I do not have Horry County. Maybe I don't have the full list, but.
Maybe.
Is it Horry, Horry County?
Correct.
I'm just looking at the list in front of me. So they're getting an allocation of $307,990.
Oh, okay. Terrific.
There.
So maybe we will. So maybe I will reach out to Horry County.
I was going to say there are 10 counties in South Carolina that are eligible for the funding, and 14 municipalities, and 1 the Catawba Indian Nation. So that just to help everyone that's participating. So and there may be lists that come from just the municipalities or just from the counties. So that might be some of the confusion on there. So Stacey, I know you're probably going to go to Eric. I hope that helped you, Amy.
Yes, it did. Thank you very much.
Great to make that connection. Eric, yes. Did you mean to have your, okay, yeah.
Beaufort County, Eric Larson, Beaufort County, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I put my question in the chat. So we have an allocation, but we don't have to share that allocation with the municipalities. They got their own letter and their own allocation.
So
okay.
The allocation formula and the way that it works, it's largely based on population. So depending on your county, there may be municipalities within your county that are formula eligible and then others that are not. And I just put a link in the chat to the full list for local government allocations so you can get a sense of who in your jurisdiction might be receiving a formula award.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I see Catherine has a few questions. Catherine, do you want to come off mute and give your questions, or do you want me to read them out?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, so just clarity on my question about the LED lights earlier. Essentially, we've got a client that's already found some funding for some HVAC upgrades, and so they were planning on doing those, but then they're like, oh, we're going to be tearing up the ceilings and having to go in, so this would be a great opportunity to also do LED lights for some of their key county buildings. One of them happens to be their EOC emergency building. So I guess one could argue that emergency building benefits everybody, but it's not the same as, the city of Columbia's example of actually putting lights in a disadvantaged community. So I guess with a specific example like that, is it best to attend an office hour to get clarity if that's going to be successful? Because we don't want to go down the rabbit hole of go in that direction and then be told, no, that's not going to be a good application.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so like I said before, like in these meetings and in the office hours, like when we don't have the full application in front of us, it's difficult to provide a definitive answer of, yes or no. However, again, I would just, refer you to some of the allowable activities guidance in the application instructions. There is a category in there for the development of energy efficiency and conservation programs for buildings. So it sounds like maybe those are the kinds of activities that you're hoping to pursue. And then you may also find additional guidance. We are working on a guidance document that provides some additional clarity on eligible uses that will be available soon. So yeah, I guess I would say for now, it sounds like what you're talking about aligns with one of those eligible use categories. And if you have any, more specific questions as the proposal is developed, office hours would certainly be, one forum to ask about those.
Great. So essentially this process should be relatively foolproof. Like you send the letter in or the form in by the 28th of April, and then you fill out for the voucher. You should be able to receive the amount that was allocated to you if you check all the boxes. Like it's not competitive. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the vouchers are only available to formula eligible entities, and the idea is that the amount of your voucher is the same as your allocation. And so, like I said, there is going to be some additional guidance forthcoming that I think will provide some more clarity, and there'll also be a process, where you're working with your project officer and other folks at DOE to ensure that a project checks all the boxes it needs to.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to jump in. There was one thing with Eric's question. It reminded me that you had mentioned earlier, Kate, that there will be a state program will be available later. And so for those entities, we mentioned the 25 and the link is in there, but for any other entities in South Carolina, municipalities or counties, they'll be eligible for the state's competitive program, but it'll be different because it'll be a competitive program, not the formula funding. So, Eric, in your example, I think Hilton Head is, I think, in your jurisdiction, but I don't think there are any other communities within Beaufort County. And so all the rest would, if they chose to participate when the state program's available, that would be when they would have an opportunity, or the competitive piece that's available, the small competitive piece that's available to all ineligible entities later. So just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, that's a great point to raise too. There is that 2% competitive. And I didn't really touch on this in my presentation, but it's important to note that, the state of South Carolina is receiving its own formula allocation. All the states receive their own formula allocation, and they are required to subgrant 60% of that to entities that are not, to local entities that are not eligible for the formula allocation. The exact manner of how they do that subgranting is left largely up to the states. So, Rochelle, you mentioned competitive, that is really going to be, it'll be up to the states to figure out how to do that. But there are, as you noted, these avenues for any entities that have not been, determined eligible to receive their own formula award.
And Mike McCauley did put in all the allocations for South Carolina in case you're wondering and want to do the teaming. You don't have to do the teaming, but if you want to do that and partner up, that is an option. So I think we got Catherine and Eric's questions all answered. Please let me know if you did not. Catherine has another question. Who is in charge of that in South Carolina, the state allocation?
So this is another thing that depends on the state. So Rochelle, I don't know if you're actually able to answer this question better than I can.
Well, we are the entity that has submitted the pre-award sheet for South Carolina. So we'll be, the Energy Office will be setting up that program. So we're learning, though, just as everyone else is learning, how the program is structured and what we can offer. And we're learning, so especially if you have neighbors that aren't eligible and you learn of things that are important for them, please share that, because that's something that we're limited in who we know within South Carolina. And I don't know, Stacy, if you have anything else to add to that.
I was just going to say, we're also going through the application process because we have to apply to receive our funding, and we have to do the pre-award application form and all the same things that you all will be doing, or if you haven't already. So we are in there with you. Are there any other questions? Would anybody else like to offer up what they plan to do with their funding or what they're thinking? See, Somerville, we are currently working with our local energy provider on possibly installing EV charging stations in our parking garage. Can we use the voucher funds to supplement that project?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, and I'll give my caveat that, everything is dependent on the exact contents of an application. But, EV charging infrastructure is one of our eligible uses. Exactly how this will work, potentially with vouchers, that guidance is still forthcoming. But, I think if you take a look at the allowable activities under statute, the EV charging infrastructure is one of those things.
Great. And does anyone else have any questions, or
I
Rochelle?
think I saw one more from Catherine. So she was asking how they can let people know that would not be eligible, but eligible for our state program. I will try to have, you can always just keep in touch with me, but we will also have more information available coming through on our website and things like that as we know what the program looks like. And we'll probably host another webinar when it gets closer to be able to share with those that would be eligible for that program. So, but feel free to email me and we'll share that for all the attendees. You'll get an email from me. So you can provide feedback that way.
And we'll also put that in our newsletter. So please, if you would like to be in our newsletter, we can add you all to that. And we will also be in contact with the Association of Counties and the Municipal Association when everything is ready.
Thanks, Stacy, for adding those pieces too. Well, I think we're about to move over to our last two pieces for this morning. So I wanted to introduce Mike McCauley with the Watershed Consulting Group. He was going to talk a little bit about some technical assistance that he might be able to offer for the municipalities and counties and Indian Nation as well. So Mike, if you want to go ahead and come off mute, and I think you were going to share some slides. So, but just before we transition to Mike, I just want to say thank you all the participants. This has been really helpful, and I'll come on after Mike and do our wrap up.
Thanks so much, Rochelle. And I will be brief. As Rochelle said, my name is Mike McCauley with Watershed Consulting Group based in Columbia, South Carolina. Just very briefly about myself, lived in South Carolina most of my life, went to the Citadel Charleston School of Law, and did spend some time away from South Carolina when I was working in Washington, D.C. I like to joke that I'm a recovering Fed. We do a lot of work now around the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act here in South Carolina, and I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. My firm and myself in particular have been funded to work with a group of nonprofits that work across the state to help elevate and amplify the opportunities in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and now the Inflation Reduction Act as well. And just to make sure that we leverage those to the fullest extent possible here in South Carolina. And so we track progress on the implementation of these laws, try to get the word out about those and work with eligible entities, whether it's the state, local governments, and others to advance funding requests and to implement those dollars. We're also partnered with the University of South Carolina in that work. One of the institutes at the university has funded faculty members for this academic year to team up with us. What does that look like? We're here to help build capacity with folks like you who are attending this webinar. We've met with and are working with local governments all across the state. And we're here to help add and build your capacity and to help provide technical assistance for the EECBG program, as well as the dozens, really hundreds of other programs and funding opportunities within these laws. And we have no agenda. We're funded to do this work in certain ways to help you advance your local priorities. So it's very much place-based, and we offer a range of ways that we can help, be it presentations and briefings. Many of y'all are members of the South Carolina Electric Transportation Network, which was a project that we stood up in the wake of the Energy Office's EV stakeholder process. So that's a forum at which you probably hear people like me giving updates about what's going on at the federal level and what opportunities are available to y'all, local governments, counties, and others. So we can give presentations in those kinds of settings, also to leaders, committees, boards, and so on, whatever may be helpful, staff. We can do research summaries. We attend many of the same webinars that you do. So we have that, we can add capacity in that way as well, passing along updates. We can provide limited grant writing support, and we are parts of larger networks through these nonprofits, as well as networks that we help facilitate. So if letters of support are needed, communication support, and so on, that's what we're funded to do. So what does that look like with respect to EECBG? So obviously we work closely with folks at the Department of Energy, DOT, at the federal level, EPA, as well as here at the state level. So we track implementation carefully. As our presenters have highlighted, there's a series of deadlines for this program, the first one being the April 28th pre-award information sheet deadline. That is to the great credit of DOE and others at the federal level. They are trying to simplify these processes because they know we're all being inundated by funding opportunities, and federal grants are no walk in the park. And so things like the voucher option and completing information, things like the information sheet in advance can help make things more efficient and less burdensome. And so we're available in a limited way to help support any of your local governments. No contract or formal engagement is needed. As I said, we're funded. So we're just here to add value for whatever your priorities are to help facilitate things. And we're not here to replace the Energy Office or DOE and the roles they play, but we frequently collaborate with them, and just wanted to offer this opportunity for any local governments that are interested. In particular for EECBG, we can help you look at what are your local priorities and where those might align with eligible uses through the EECBG program. We can access subject matter experts through our networks, through the nonprofits around the state. We can help you discern whether a voucher or a grant application is a better option for you. Once the blueprints are posted, we can look at those with you. And of course, any localities that are looking to team up on a regional or sort of local basis, we'd be glad to help provide any advice or additional capacity for that, as well as looking at how you can stack grants, as has already been asked. There are, of course, lots of ground rules around those, and we're very comfortable in the weeds. So happy to help provide that additional support. So here's my contact information. I'll be sure to drop it in the chat as well, and I'm sure it'll be in the follow-up materials. And just don't hesitate to reach out if there's ways that we can help you and your community.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. We'll add some in the, like you said, in the follow-up materials. Hopefully you'll see that in your inbox in the next day or so, when the recording is available and some of those contacts. I want to just give a real quick thank you first to you participants to be part of this, from Kate and her team at the Department of Energy, from Mike and his team at the Watersheds, and Stacy and our team here in the Energy Office. So I really appreciate all that, and thank you very much. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks, everyone. Bye.